introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Seema Jaitley, Managing Director of SJ Solutions. Seema has been specialising in pharmacovigilance for 20 years and has headed up global pharmacovigilance and medical affairs before setting up SJ Solutions. SJ Solutions services span both consulting and contracting to provide solutions to drug safety, research and other affairs relating to running of a business within the pharmaceuticals industry. Seema has helped companies in implementing the new EU legislation and is currently studying for her MSc in epidemiology. Seema, over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. So welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk about the updated GVP Module 5. So as you are aware, I'm sure, that this came into effect as of the 31st of March 2017. And if we look at where the main changes are, it's really with regards to the definition of your important risks, your missing information and characterization or clarifying exactly what is missing information, removing risks as well from your risk management system, and then the RMP template has been updated as well. So I just thought it was worthwhile going over the rationale. This hasn't actually changed. It's very much the same. The risk-benefit balance, as we know, when your product comes to the marketplace, is positive for the target population. However, you do need to have risk management planning that is appropriate and proportionate, and that is really what the risk management system is in place to do. It's there to help you to identify, characterize and minimize the important risks that are associated with your product. But I mean, certainly what is important here is the fact that it needs to be appropriate and proportionate, and there is a move towards this, certainly with the update of this module. The three sections of your risk management system, or certainly the risk management plan, are your safety spec, where you discuss all of the safety information to do with your product at that point in time. That helps you then to identify and characterize the safety profile and understand what becomes your important risks and your missing information. And then the PV plan, which is your pharmacovigilance activities, again to characterize and quantify the risks, and your risk minimization plan, which includes your risk minimization measures and evaluation of that. But that is very much similar to what was in the previous version. I think where we have seen a change, well, identified risk in itself is still very much the same. This is where you've got enough evidence to say that something has been caused by the product. They do mention here, though, things like off-label use, medication errors, drug interactions. So really broadening that, where you're broadening what you think of with regards to a risk. So it's not just an adverse event as such or an issue. It is more looking at real-world usage overall. Now, the important risk has changed and what is considered important. So an important risk, identified risk, is something that is likely to have an impact on the risk-benefit balance of the product. And usually you would need further evaluation in some way as part of the PV plan, because you're trying to characterize that risk further, so either looking at frequency, severity, serious, etc. So you're going to have additional pharmacovigilance activities in some way, or risk minimization activities are required. So here they talk about the fact that your information, your product information, may advise on specific clinical actions or additional risk minimization activities. Now, if we look at the older version of important identified risk, here what we had was a risk that could have an impact, obviously, on the risk-benefit balance of the product, but it was where they had implications for public health or on an individual basis and based on the seriousness of the risk. And normally, and it did state this within the module, any risk that is likely to be included in the contraindications or warnings and precautions section of the product information would be an important identified risk. And I think this led then to a whole load of important identified risks based on your warnings and precautions, your contraindications. Anything that was in there would be picked up and put into here. And they wanted to move away from that a little bit and focus on those risks where you needed some additional activity in some way. So either where clinical action, risk minimization activities, additional risk minimization activities, that is, or additional pharmacovigilance activities. So really focus on what is considered important for that product. If we look at potential, so again here the actual definition of a potential risk is the same. It's something where there's a suspicion of a causal relationship, but you don't have enough evidence to be able to say, yes, this is associated with the product. Again, you need to consider those other kind of areas such as off-label, long-term use, etc. And important here has changed as well in the sense that it's not just impact on the individual, dependent on severity, seriousness of the event, but it's where you could have an impact on risk-benefit balance of the product when further characterized, and further evaluation is required as part of the PV plan. So again, focusing on a risk where you would need additional activity to be able to confirm that a little bit further. Now coming on to missing information. So again, I mean, when we used to put missing information into the RMP, it'll be a whole load of things that you haven't, or things I'm saying, populations that you haven't studied within the clinical trial setting. Pregnancy, lactation would always be in there. You put loads and loads of things. Any patient population that hadn't been exposed really. And again, there's a move from that to thinking about find populations that you don't know about, but where the safety profile may be different, and that's the way to think about it now, rather than just putting everything within the RMP where you just don't have that information. So they talk about gaps in knowledge with regards to the safety of the product for certain anticipated use, and what they mean here is it could be long-term use. So if your program only has 6 months and the use is going to be much longer, then you would need to consider that with regards to missing information, because there may be a difference in the safety profile for long-term use, or in particular populations that haven't been studied, but where you think that there is going to be a difference in that safety profile. And that is the key bit, that there's a difference in the safety profile. So as I've written here, the absence of data itself isn't automatically a safety concern. So it could be that maybe in your program, you only went up to age 50, but actually 50 to 70, there's not going to be that much difference from a safety profile. Therefore, you can justify that that's not going to be missing information. But on the other end, with the PEDS, maybe there is going to be a different safety profile for whatever reason, and you would then add that as missing information. So you need to focus on those situations that might differ from what you know already, and you do need to include a scientific rationale as missing, for whatever you include as missing information. So I think another thing that the module has brought really is about dynamism, and I mean the fact that this is a dynamic document. It's not meant to stay static. You are going to have changes on an ongoing basis. You review it on an ongoing basis. I don't think that quite came out with the previous modules, but this module, it is quite clear that it is a dynamic document. And it then allows you or gives you more advice with regards to addition and removal of risks from the safety concerns, or if you're amending the classification, or even the missing information side of things. So, I mean, just to give you a few examples here, you got your removal of important potential risk. It could be that you don't have the clinical data to support that anymore, and actually a causal relationship isn't there. You would take that out. I mean, there's no point having important potential risks there for ever and ever. You want to make sure that you're dealing with whatever is appropriate for your product at that point in time. It could be also that the clinical impact is less than you would have expected, in which case you would again want to be removing that potential risk because it's not considered important as per the definition. Or further characterization isn't needed, therefore, or cannot be done, nothing further can, in which case you would then consider removing that potential risk as well. You've done everything that you can, nothing further can be done. Or you change to an important identified risk because you've got enough data now to say, yes, there is that causal association. It could be that your risk is now fully characterized and appropriately managed. So generally, if your product's been on the market for a long time, you don't have any outstanding additional pharmacovigilance activities or risk minimization activities, or those that are required where you do need some clinical input are so embedded into clinical practice that actually you don't need to highlight it anymore. there is a mechanism now for removing that and saying, yes, okay, it was an important identified risk for those reasons, but if you look at the treatment protocols, the clinical guidelines, they all state very clearly what needs to be done. It's fully integrated into standard clinical practice. We don't need to then keep this as an important identified risk. I mean, I think there are difficulties with that, because it is, I think, very hard to remove your important identified risk where you do need to do something with regards to minimizing that risk. And even if it has become standard clinical practice, I think it's still going to be difficult to actually take that risk out, especially where you've got perhaps litigation going on with regards to those risks, because taking that out kind of well, although it doesn't downgrade it, it has a perception of downgrading it. And so I think, it'll be interesting to see how companies do deal with that. So missing information as well, that could be changed. You could get data that shows that actually the safety profile is very much the same as your population profile, therefore doesn't need to be missing information anymore. Or it could become, important identified risk if you show that there is a difference and you get more information available. Or if you've actually fully characterized it, then you can take that out, the missing information out, if you don't need to do anything further. So if we look at the actual review of your RMP, we do monitor data on an ongoing basis, as we know, continuously. That is reflected within the PSUR. And at the time of the PSUR preparation, you may update your RMP, or may decide there may be enough information or information presented within your PSUR that leads you to update your RMP or not. However, they do talk about key time points within the module, and the time points are at your first 5-year renewal, and also at the time of your first PSUR after that 5-year renewal, so about 8 to 9 years after the initial marketing authorization. And those time points really reflect the fact that you're going to have a lot more data available, so in the first 5 years and then about 8 to 9 years afterwards, that would allow you to really delve into your risks that you've got, your missing information, and be able to amend your RMP appropriately. So that is defined within Module 5. So there's some information about submission as well of the RMP. I think previously this was a little bit difficult to work out exactly how you could update your RMP and what you needed to do, but you have PDF files within the ECTD. Your Annex 1, which is your user vigilance interface, is in the XML format, and that's submitted within a specified timescale. Your updates are through a variation, but if you have a PSUR that leads to an update of your RMP, you can submit that with the PSUR without a variation. But if you are just amending your RMP, you can't submit that with the PSUR. It has to be linked in some way. If you had an update to the RMP that was distinct from the PSUR, you would need to submit that as a variation. I mean, interestingly enough, you can't submit an RMP update with the PSUSA process. Here, you would have to either submit a separate variation or with another upcoming procedure in some way. There's a focus as well with regards to the other types of products, and there's expanded guidance really for the generics, because I think this did come up quite a bit. It was difficult to work out what you needed to do, how, and what needed to be submitted. So here, depending on the amount of data that's available from the originator, or the information that's available from the originator, will depend on or will drive what you need to submit. So if the originator has an RMP, then you just need to include Module 8. So that's just your safety spec, your list. But if you, as a generic, decide, because you may have additional data, additional information, you may decide to add or remove something from the safety specification. If you do decide to do that, then you will also need to submit Module 7, which is the detail behind your important risks and your missing information. Now, if the originator doesn't have an RMP, but the safety concerns are on the CMDH website, there's a spreadsheet that's available there, then you would follow the you would follow as before. So you would include Module 8, but if you remove or add anything, you would then include Module 7. If the RMP is not available from the originator at all and you don't have the safety concerns list on the CMDH website, then you would need to submit both Module 7 and Module 8. And you would need to define your important risks and missing information and justify why those are considered to be as such. So QPPV oversight and approval, evidence isn't needed for versions that are submitted for assessment, but you do need oversight for the finalized version. But approval can be in the form of the statement, and within the module they give a good example of some text that can be used for that as well. I thought it was just worthwhile, before we go on to the actual changes to the template, just talking about the PSUR and the RMP and the differences. And again, I think as we've got more experience with PSURs and RMPs and how they interplay, it's really highlighting what the differences are. And the fact that your PSUR is meant to be more of a look back at the data that you've received over a certain period of time, putting it into context of the cumulative data that you have, and it's an integrated retrospective post-authorization risk-benefit assessment. Whereas the RMP is looking more forward and it's looking at planning overall to manage those risks and that missing information, what additional information is required prospectively looking forward. And they're meant to be complementary documents. Right, so just coming on to the RMP format itself. So it is a similar format, so the actual parts are the same. I think where you see most of the differences, it's in Part 2 and probably the annexes as well. So again, there's discussion about making sure that the information provided is proportionate to the risk. So they don't want a data dump of absolutely everything. And it really is about, you could see from the module and from the templates, about linking to dossier, really having a look at it holistically rather than presenting all of the information within the RMP, but having those references, those links to other parts of the dossier where appropriate, so you don't repeat information consistently throughout the RMP. Anyone who's worked with the old RMP template will know how painful that was with certain parts of the information that you put in there. Now for ATMP, there is specific guidance on the website, but that hasn't changed much. The risks that you would want to think, or areas that you would want to consider, are very much the same for your gene therapy, etc., those kind of products. It's active substance based and not per product, so clarification of that. And again, highlighting the fact that there shouldn't be duplication with regards to the rest of the dossier and also within the RMP itself. Now they do mention Annex 7 and the references here, and the fact that you should only include the key ones that are relevant for the RMP as a whole, relevant for the important parts of the RMP. You don't have to include all of the references within the RMP. So again, a bit more focused on the important information within the RMP. And I have actually included a table that shows the mapping between the ECTD and the RMP, which does help, especially when you're putting it together. And that's here, you can see that here. So again, it's very helpful because you can see what you should be using to write the different sections of the RMP, and also where you can cross-refer as well. So I'm just going to highlight or talk about where there are differences that certainly I picked up. And Part 2 is, like I said, where probably a bit more clarification of things has been included. So if we look at Module 3, this is a clinical trial exposure. So here, data on any new indication or new pharmaceutical form or route should be added in separately at the beginning of the module, and then pooled data within the body of that module later on. If we look at Part 2, this is, if we look at Module 5, post-authorization experience, and I think we were having difficulty where you had a product or a medicinal product active where you did have information available within the organization or elsewhere, yet this was the first RMP. So it was a bit odd because you'd have to put in, well, you know, this is the first RMP, yet you knew there was a body of evidence available that may be relevant to that active that should be included. So they've clarified that a bit. And you should include data from the same active, but where relevant to the risks that you're talking about within the RMP. So again, it shouldn't be a data dump. It needs to be a considered decision as to what you would include there, and to make sure that it's relevant to the information and the risks that are presented within the RMP. You can also include data from authorizations outside the EU that aren't approved within the EU, again, if it's relevant to the risks that have been identified and missing information. And of course, on-label, off-label use and use in special populations, where available, where that information is available, should be presented. But again, they highlight that it should not be a data dump straight from a PSUR or something like that. It does need to, you do need to have consideration around what you're putting in there. So if we look at the additional EU requirements, so this seems to have been reduced in size significantly, and all I can see in there is misuse for legal purposes. And it seems that they've moved most of the things that you'd put in there previously to Module 7, which is your discussion, you know, of your important risks and your missing information. And so what they talk about is the fact that these areas, your potential harm from overdose, medication errors, etc., off-label, transmission of infectious agents, should be talked about or discussed in this module where they're relevant to the product. So before, you'd have to have all of that information included within part in your Module 6, but actually it's moved now to Module 7. So it appears that you would only include it if it's relevant for your product and needs to be discussed in that regard. They do also talk about other risks that you need to consider, so things like disposal, fertility, pediatric safety. So all of these other things, other than your simple adverse events, do need to be considered when you're thinking about what risks to include within Module 7. So if we move to the next slide. So this is, again, where there's been a lot of change, because before what you would do is you would list your important identified risks, and you'd have the table, and you'd talk about your important potential risks, and you'd have information on that, a bit more information on your drug interactions, anything that's relevant from a class perspective, that kind of thing. But this has been changed quite a bit. So what you've got at the beginning now is your safety concerns in the initial RMP submission, and that's meant to stay static and not change at all. It's kind of your baseline. Then what you have are your risks considered important for inclusion in the list of safety concerns, so your important identified potential risks, and your risks not considered important for inclusion in the list of safety concerns. And what you can do with the list of those that aren't considered important is group them together and kind of describe them underneath the different headings that are relevant. So it could be that an event has minimal clinical impact on a patient, therefore not considered important, or a low frequency and minimal clinical impact. So basically, you have to go through the safety profile and really justify as to what you're including and what you're not including. I mean, I think this will be quite interesting, because I think there will be a tendency to kind of look through absolutely everything that's within the SPC and justify why you haven't included all of the other events, and it could get horrendously long. So again, it'll be interesting to see how we deal with this, and maybe some further guidance might be needed with regards to how this is dealt with. They also have a section for new safety concerns and reclassification with submission of an updated RMP. So this is where, you know, you may take something out, you may reclassify, and you should provide just the top line details, enough information just so you can understand what's happened. It shouldn't be, again, a data dump, and you just have that justification including. But there is a lot of wording within the template to help you to understand, or provide to help you I guess, enter the relevant text that can help you explain different things with regards to what's included, what's not included, and where you do have a reclassification. So they have tried to help. So then we come to the actual important identified risks and important potential risks that are taken forward into the safety spec. Again, they say don't duplicate the discussion that's within the PBRA or signal evaluation. It should be top line. The information is similar to the tables that we used to have within the RMP. You can see the MEDRA term. You can see they've moved it around a bit, the mechanism, evidence sources there. It's a bit more like the CM's kind of way of dealing with the benefit risk. Characterization is all in one. So before we used to have frequency and then you'd have severity. They brought that all together so you just discuss the risk in one piece. And then the risk factors and risk group is there, preventability. The risk-benefit impact is new, and public health impact has been there before. So they've removed kind of background information that used to be in there, but you would, if that's relevant, you'd probably put that in and describe that somewhere. And for missing information, you'd have your MEDRA PT, and then the evidence that the safety profile differs to the general target population, and you would describe the population that needed further characterization or the risk that you would anticipate. So it's changed a bit with regards to information that's provided for the individual risks, but it's fairly similar. The new bit is the benefit risk impact. Now, if we look at part 3, this is a PV plan. So again, enhance a bit more information with regards to what's considered routine, what's considered additional. So routine pharmacovigilance, they say, don't include anything that's in the PSMF. However, it is a little bit confusing, I think, as to what they want us to put in here. I mean, it seems anything over case processing and signal detection, so, over ADRs and signal management or detection should be included here. So it may be that you do have stuff in the PSMF that goes over and above that, but I would still put it in here. So they do talk about recording of tests that would form part of standard clinical practice. That's still considered routine. But if you had collection of tissue in some way, that would be additional pharmacovigilance. So routine pharmacovigilance or activities over and above ADRs and signal detection are things that are listed here, your specific questionnaires, cumulative reviews, etc. But they're still considered to be routine. And there's a section within the RMP to say routine pharmacovigilance activities. That's where you would detail that. And then the additional activities are really referring to the studies, non-clinical studies, clinical trials, and non-interventional studies. Annex 3, which I'll come onto, does have the protocols that are discussed within the PV plan there. If we look at the types of studies, I'm sure you're used to these categorizations. You've got your category 1, 2, 3. These are the ones that should be included within your additional pharmacovigilance activities. Category 1 being condition of the marketing authorization. Category 2, where there's an obligation in the context of conditional marketing authorization or an MA under exceptional circumstances. And Category 3 is where it's required within the RMP, really to look at a safety concern or evaluate the effectiveness of risk minimization, but it is also legally enforceable. And they do have a table as well that they have included in the module to try and help you understand what category your study comes under and what is the actual reference for that, and whether it's interventional, non-interventional, and where to include it. So if we move on to part 5 now, so risk minimization. So again, routine and additional risk minimization. The routine part, they've given a lot more information with regards to some of these things. So the SBC pill, we've been used to labeling, pack size, legal status. There's a lot more information with regards to this and what would be considered routine risk minimization to help you to make that distinction between the two. Of course, there is the reference to GVP Module 16, which gives you that full information around your risk minimization and additional risk minimization, but it is quite helpful, the information that's provided within the module. They talk about the additional risk minimization and the fact that this needs to be, you need to ensure that it's absolutely essential. Don't just add in additional risk minimization for the sake of it. We know that already. You know, it's in all of the modules anyway, and that you need to review on an ongoing basis to ensure that you still need to perform those additional risk minimization activities. Annex 6 is where you provide the details, and you should describe or include a discussion of the impact of those additional risk minimization activities when you update the RMP, and that is new as well. And then lastly, I think, second to last, RMP Part 6, which is the public summary, that has been amended to flow a bit better, because before it was a bit piecemeal, didn't quite make sense. You had your safety concerns first, and you talked about epidemiology. Now it is just a much more succinct, and hopefully will be more relevant to the public domain, although other parts of the RMP may be made public as well. So they have tried to reduce then the actual duplication that was in the public summary, so that it limits, I guess, the fact that you could have errors then across the RMP in one section and it wasn't followed through appropriately in the other section. And if we look at the annexes, this is where we've reduced from 11 or 12 I think, to 8. And they've tried to, again, make this a bit more succinct. They've removed the marketing authorization status. PV studies is in one, protocols is in other, but you can see it is a little bit confusing because you've got Part A, B, C. So A, where you've submitted for regulatory review within this RMP. Part B is where you've had something that's been submitted, a protocol that's been submitted before, has been amended in this RMP, that's in Part B. And then Part C is previously agreed but not reviewed by the National Competent Authority. So those are more your classification 3 kind of studies. Then you've got your specific adverse event follow-up form, your protocols for your Part 4, this is post-authorization efficacy studies, your risk minimization activities, other supporting data relevant for the RMP, and then you've got your summary of changes, and that is new. So your Annex 8 is your summary of changes to the risk management plan over time. That's where you've added or removed or reclassified your safety concerns or your studies or your risk minimization activities to give you that overview of what's changed within the RMP. Now, one thing I didn't actually put on the slides, which I apologize about, is that your new template can be used as of 31st of March 2017, so it can be used as of now, and you have to use a new format as of 31st of March 2018. So you've got a year to transition to the new format. And I'm going to end there, just slightly over time. Are there any questions? So Firial's written, regarding the risk not considered important for inclusion in the list of safety concerns, would this include all AEs abnormal lab results? Yeah, if yes, then would this not increase the burden of work? Would it mean too much information? And I think that is a fair point. And I'll be honest, I think we have to start writing one to understand exactly how we exclude, or what we say we're excluding, as in what's relevant. My gut feel is that you wouldn't include absolutely everything, because that doesn't make any sense. But I think the difficulty will be, how do you make that distinction of what to focus on within the RMP for exclusion? So a couple of people are typing, so I'm just waiting for the questions to come up. Yeah, so all RMPs will have to be transferred to the new format. So when I looked at the module, it wasn't 100% clear, but reading through it again, it seems that is the case, yes. So during the transition time, can MAHs use the previous template as well, particularly if they are already in the process of writing a new RMP? They can do, and some companies have chosen to do that and stay with the old template, but you will have to have the new template by the 31st of March 2018. And Naveen, what would be the impact of the change definition of risks on the number of risks? So really, the number of risks should come down, because you should be focusing on those that have the additional activities required, either pharmacovigilance activities or where you need clinical, you need to perform a clinical exam in some way, or additional risk minimization activities. However, I think it's still going to be quite difficult. I think companies are going to find it hard to take risks out of the RMP. Just psychologically, it's quite difficult to remove something from an RMP. But really, it is kind of heading to where we should be, because we should be focusing on those risks where you do need to do something different, something a little bit extra. That's why it's considered important. So hopefully that's answered your question, Naveen. Thanks. Okay, great. Okay, sorry, a couple more questions. Okay, thanks. Great. I don't have all the answers. I haven't used the new template yet. Maybe we'll do another webinar when we use the new template, get a bit more of a feel for it. But I think it's useful to know what those differences are and kind of how we should be thinking when we're putting the RMP together in the new template. I see a couple of people typing, but maybe in the interest of time. Yeah, so there is a Q&A document that's available, but the it's really it seems to be more from a public domain perspective, so or for lay people. So it doesn't really give the information that we would need. It's more to explain to anyone that's going to be looking at the RMP on the EMA website as to what it's about. So it's not really helpful for us. Okay, so ADRs mentioned in section 4.8 are risks, because usually I heard that for risks, please refer. Well, a risk is anything that will happen with your drug that's, you know, considered negative as such, I guess you could say. So an ADR is a risk. The warnings and precautions were your important risks, identified risks, but really anything that's within section 4.8 is also a risk. It's just not considered an important risk usually. Obviously, it depends on the type of ADRs that you have. Okay, I saw someone typing, but I can't see anyone typing now. I think the module itself does have a lot of good examples, as does the RMP template. So I would go through the template, because they have tried to help us in understanding what should be included, what shouldn't, how things should be presented. So I think it's definitely more useful than some of the other templates and modules have been. They have tried to help us. Yeah, interesting. So I think pregnancy and lactation is always one of those areas where it's very difficult to leave out of missing information, even though, I mean, I guess you go back to first principles and think, is the population or the profile, safety profile of that population going to be different? And it could be, in which case you would then include it in missing information. If you have reason to believe it wouldn't be, then you wouldn't include it in missing information, and you would justify it in that way. So I guess it would depend on the product, the profile of the product, and the use of the product overall, and whether you thought there was a different safety profile in that patient population that needed to be characterized. So if the CDS mentions some population as special population, is this missing information? I mean, it could be. It depends on what it says within the core data sheet. And if you have reason to believe that it is again, like I said, is that principle of has the special population got a different safety profile that I need to consider for this product? If the CDS says that we don't have information, and you think that this is something that, and you think that the safety profile in that population could be different and needs characterizing, then it would be missing information. But if you think it isn't, then it wouldn't be missing information. So there's probably another caveat then to thinking about special populations. what you're thinking. Is the safety profile going to be different? Do I think it is? If I think it is, then I need to add that as missing information. I would justify that as the reason for adding it as missing information, that I need further characterization. Okay, great. So we're on at 10:40, 10 minutes over. Apologies for that, but I hope that's been helpful. If you do have any questions, though, do email me, and I will do my best to answer them. I may well not have the answers, but I will try my best to find out what I can for you. So hopefully that was helpful, and look forward to hearing from you guys at the next webinar, or having you present at the next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.